Hey, this is Henning from FlippedNormals. In this tutorial, we are going to be covering the basics of Maya. We assume that you have some knowledge of 3D beforehand, but that you are completely fresh to Maya. Before that, make sure to check out our full Introduction to Maya series. This is a 12-hour series where we cover everything you need to know about really the entire software. We cover modeling, shading, using Arnold, XGen, all of that. We go through how to make this full image from scratch, from all the modeling, shading, the groom, the lighting, and we also cover how to use really all the features you need. So make sure to check that out, link in the description. This is what Maya is going to look like the first time you open it up. And the very first thing you're going to be seeing is this big, beautiful 3D workspace. So this is where we'll start out. Navigation is quite simple. We rotate by using Alt and left mouse button. We zoom by Alt and right mouse button, or we can use the scroll wheel on the mouse, and we pan by Alt and middle mouse button. I'm personally using a tablet in this tutorial, and I keep switching between the tablet and a mouse quite often, but this is totally up to your personal preference. If we have an item, we can now hit the F key to frame it, and we can go into the different ortho views by holding down the spacebar, and now we get up this hotbox. If you were to click and hold on Maya, you see this in the middle. And now we can go to the right view, do it again, top view, go to the front view, go back to perspective view, and we can even make a new camera right here. One of the first things we have to talk about is what is a project? Normally, you would just assume that a project is your entire project in a colloquial sense. It's all your texture maps and all your models and all that. In Maya, this is a bit different. A project in Maya is a very specific way Maya deals with files. And we can set the project by going under File, Set Project, and now we can choose a directory for this. By default, this is going to be under your Use directory, Documents, Maya, and Projects, at least if you are on Windows. So now we can create a new folder. In this directory, you can call this Intro to Maya, and we can put it here. Go into the folder. Can hit set, and now we just create a new default workspace. And now if we were to go to this location, you can see that we have a new folder, and we go in here, we have a workspace file. So what we have to do is we have to go to File and Project window on the bottom, and then we just need to hit Accept. Now you can see that we're going to get all these different folders created, and this is where it's going to put everything. So hit Accept. And if we hit refresh now you can see that we have all of these. The reason we're talking about this so early is because this is really essential. Your scenes will go under scenes, all your render data will go into one folder, all your XGen files will go into one folder. So it's really important to know that. Now, the next thing we will talk about is saving. This is relating to the project as well. If we go to File and Save, it's now going to just bring us up to the last place we saved, which was the default project. But now you can see here to the left, we have all the different areas we can save into by default. And you can see current project, enter to Maya. And we can go under scenes, and now we can just save our project. And now we can just save our file. We have two kinds of files. We have Maya binary and Maya ASCII. Maya ASCII allows you to actually open up the file in a text editor, but it's a bit slower to use. And Maya binary is a bit faster to use, but it doesn't allow you to open up in a text editor. So I prefer to save this as a Maya ASCII file. And then we can call this intro 01. And then we just hit save. And then now our scene has been saved. Down here, you can see that it's printing out the result of what just happened. So if we were to now just create a new cube or new cylinder, whatever it is, it's going to be printing everything. So whatever it is we're doing, it will print it down here. Let's talk about auto-saving as well. Maya can be a bit, how do we put this? A bit crashy sometimes. It's a generally pretty good software, but it does just tend to crash a fair bit. So we are going to have to talk about autosave right away. We find the autosave settings under Windows, Settings and Preferences, under Settings, and now we have a whole tab of different things. And then it's going to be under Files and Projects, and then autosave. Now, you don't have to set this to 10 minutes, maybe something like 30 is better. But in general, I highly recommend that you actually have this enabled. It's going to go under the autosave directory under your project as well. So if you need to find this, just go under your project and autosave. A little tip as well while we're in this exact settings menu is if we scroll down a little bit, now you can see we have file dialog And by default, it's going to be using the Maya native, which meaning that it's going to be using this one. But we can also switch this to OS native. So if we now were to save this, and we go to File and Save As, now you can see it's actually going to be using the OS file browser, just the Windows file browser. So this is just a bit more intuitive, at least for me, but up to you. So here's a Maya scene I've created. This is one of the scenes we use in the full intro series, and it has a few different elements. It has 4 models. You can't see one because it has a transparent shader, and it has a bunch of different things. What we need to do now is we need to talk about the outliner. We can find the outliner to the left. You see here this icon here. Now we have the outliner, and this is really a quick way of getting an overview of everything in your scene. You can see now we have the different groups or the different objects named groups, and we're going to rename these. So we can do this by double clicking on the object, and then we can call this model 01, and we can do the same for the other guys if we want to, model 02. And then we can group all of them by selecting them all, select one, select the other by holding down Shift, and then we can hit Control G. Control G is going to group them all. So now we created a new group, and now we can call this statue models group. If we want to parent this under another group, we can very easily do this. We can hold down the middle mouse button, and we can just drag this up, and then we can put this under the model group. If we want to take it out of the model group, we can just middle mouse button and drag it out to one of the other areas. And if we want to do this without dragging, we can hold down the Shift key and hit the P key. So Shift P, and this is going to unparent it. So very easy to just start reparenting things like this. This means that now if you want to move all the models, we can now just select the group, and we can move all of the models. We can also hide something as well. We can do this by hitting the H key. So now we can hide this entire group. We can hit H again to unhide it. We also have a little secret, which is that we have a double outliner. So you see on the bottom, we have some dotted lines, and we can just drag on this, and this gives us a double outliner. Now, this isn't handy for a simple scene like this, but it's really handy if you're working with a complex scene and you have thousands of objects. Now you can really go deep into one, and you can just go from one to the other, because these are independent of each other in terms of where you're looking. So you can have one open here, and you can have one open here, and you can just drag from one to the other. Another thing as well is that if you want to open up the entire hierarchy, let's say this model here, this model group, we can now shift click on the plus sign, and this opens up the entire hierarchy. So now everything is exposed, which is really useful. As a little bonus as well, we can also go under display and deselect DAG objects only. And now you can see this goes crazy. And you might have experienced this yourself, where suddenly you're seeing so much crap in your scene and you have no idea what's going on. Well, this is because Maya is node-based, and this is a connection of all the different nodes in your scene. So this is a really handy way of actually seeing what's going on. So this will be all your materials. You can see here we have like a blend, and we have different materials down here. So it's a really handy way of selecting everything in your scene. So we can disable this by going to display and DAG objects only. So we briefly alluded to the fact that Maya is node-based, and we'll show you an example of this. First, let's just hide our statue models. We can select the group and hit the H key. And then we're going to be creating a cube. Don't worry about what I'm specifically doing right away, because we'll cover all of this in a second. This is more just to show you a concept. We will use a feature called the node editor. Go to Window, and here we have the node editor. Just click on this, and now you can see all the nodes. Now we can drag this down and dock it to the bottom here just by dragging it down, and you can see this blue line. Now just do release when it's on top of the blue line, and here we can see the node editor. And then we can click on the input and output right here, and now you can see everything connected to this node. So we have a few different nodes. First off, this is the one we can use to actually change the segments. So now you can see that we can change the segments on and off. This means that you can keep changing the segments even after you created the model, which you can't do in other software. So or in some other software at least. So if you've selected something else, you can still go back and you can change the amount of segments. You also have the shape node. The shape node shows how it's drawn. It shows, is it wireframe, is it smooth, all the different attributes you have regarding how it's actually drawn in the viewport. The next up, we have the transform node. The transform node determines where it is in space. Then what we can do, we can assign a material to this. Right mouse button, assign favorite material, and we can assign a blend to it. And now you can see we have assigned a blend material to this. So we have the material right here, and this is where we can actually change the color of it. Now, this is not how I actually work day to day, but my point is that this is how Maya displays data under the hood, and this becomes really important for everything you're doing. Remember all the things we saw under the outliner? This is where we can see all of them. So we can now, for instance, we can find blend 3, we can double click here, and we can just search for blend 3, and it's going to be right there. So we have all the nodes. If we were to now extrude something, again, don't worry about how I'm doing this. We'll talk about this in a second. Now we have the name for the extrusion here, and you can find this when we search for it. So even an extrusion is a node. Now this is both awesome and it's terrible. And we'll get into that in a second why it's terrible. But for now, just know that stuff is connected via nodes, and this becomes really important. So next up, we look at two interface items which are very much connected to nodes. We have the attribute editor right here. Then we have the channel box right here. You can toggle between these two by hitting Control and A. So the channel box is really one of the most basic ones. That's where we click on the object, and here you can see all the different channels. So this is a transform, and here you can see the inputs as well. Here we have the extrusion, and then we scroll down a little bit. Here we have the initial segments of the object. Then we can switch to the attribute editor, which is done by Control and A. Now, I had a really hard time with the attribute editor in the beginning before I understood nodes, and this is really the reason why we talked about nodes, because without it, you wouldn't understand what these are. But now you can see that these correspond perfectly. We have pcube1, which is the transform node, which is right here. Then we have pcube shape, which is the actual shape node. And so you can see that we have a lot of different options for them. So under here, we have a bunch of different options for each one of them. And we're not going to be covering these. This will take a crazy amount of time. But the point is that they are here. Then we have the extrusion, which has all sorts of different options. So if we want to change something like the thickness, the divisions, whatever it might be, we can do that. Then we have the actual original construction. The original creation node as well, so we can change all of these things like the scale and all that of it. And then we have the shader. So this corresponds perfectly to all different nodes we have attached to our object. So if you're wondering what all of these things are, well, they're just nodes being attached. It's just a way of displaying the nodes. So let's just kill the node editor and let's move on to some modeling. The way I prefer to work is using something called marking menus. Marking menus is an awesome tool, and you have a lot of power with this system. Instead of going through every single shelf and every single menu item to do something, you can simply select an object and you can use the marking menus for it. So if you want to create an object, you can hit Shift right mouse button, and then we get up creation menus. So now we can create a cone real quick. If you want to do general things to it, you can right mouse button, and now you can see that we have general attributes and the general selection tools, whatever it might be. And we also have component modes. So this is just right mouse button. We can now select a vert. We can select the face. We can select the object, go back into the object. This is just by right mouse button and just selecting them where they are. Then we can go into a component mode by right mouse button, selecting a face. And now if we hold on Control right mouse button, we get selection tools. And if we hold on Shift right mouse button, we get general modeling tools. Now this looks a bit confusing in the beginning, but this is really one of the most powerful ways of working in Maya. And we're going to be using this throughout this entire series. So in short, that's right mouse button for general properties and general for changing component mode. Once we're in a component mode, once we're in a component, we can Shift right mouse button, and this gives us modeling tools. And we can Control right mouse button with something selected to give us selection tools. If we want to move something around, we can easily do that with the move tool, which you can find over here to the left. We can do this just by moving this around like so. You can see we have the gizmo. We can also use the hotkey W to go into the move tool. Then we have rotation, which you can find over here. And then we can just start to rotate this around. We can also hit the E key for rotation. Then we can scale by hitting the R key or going over here. And then we can just start to scale stuff up like this. We can also just scale on individual axes like so, or we can scale on 2 axes by clicking on this square between the two. So that's W for move, E for rotate, and R for scale. If you're in rotation as well, there's a little nifty tip. That is that you can do incremental rotation. So if you hold on the J key now, it's going to rotate to every 15 degrees by default, like so. So it's a really handy way of rotating. So hold on J and just move it around like so. You can also find a lot of settings for them by double clicking on the tool. And then you have a lot of settings here for each different tool. We aren't really going to be covering this too much right away, but a bunch of different useful stuff. What we can do as well is, let's just move this guy up a little bit. What we can do, we can change between world and local. We can do this by going to axis orientation, and then we can set this to object, and we can set this to world. So you can see the difference is the world is going to move it based on world space, and object is going to move it based on the object space. So you can just move it up and down like so. You can also hold on the W key to switch between these two. Now you can see we have object, which is in object mode, and world, which takes it to world mode. The most basic way of selecting is by being in object mode, just right mouse button and object mode, and then we just click on what we want to have selected, just left mouse button. If we want to select multiple, we can hold down the shift key and we can select multiple things. If we want to deselect, we just hold on the shift key and we just deselect it. If we want to select the opposite, we can now shift and drag on top. Now you can see we get this rectangle. Now we can just shift and drag on top, and now we can select the opposite. So this just inverts the selection, shift and drag. If we want to select a loop, we can go in, select the object, right mouse button to go on in face mode. And now we can select one poly just by left mouse button on it, just by clicking on it. And then we can hold on the shift key and we can just double click on the loop we want. So select the first one, then select the next one. Unlike some software, it doesn't matter where you select on the polygon, you just select the first and then select the next one. If we are in edge mode, just right mouse button on edge, we can just double click on an edge to select an edge loop. And we can select multiple by holding on the shift key and just double clicking like so. And we can remove from the selection by holding down the control key and double clicking on it. Or we can just click on it, but control double click actually removes the entire edge loop. If we want to do a range select, meaning we want to select from here to here, we can select the first one, hold down the shift key and shift double click to select a range, like so. This works with polygons as well. Select this face, hold on shift and double click, and this selects the entire range. If you want to go back into object mode, we can right mouse button and go into object mode, and now we're in object mode. One issue is that sometimes it's a bit difficult to actually see what's going on, or you have to access a specific modeling tool and you just have to deselect everything. So what you can do is you could of course just control click on the model, but you can also hit the Alt D key. Alt D deselects everything, which is really useful. If you have a bunch of things selected and you just want deselected, Alt D deselects everything. If we want to grow and shrink our selection, we can do that. Click on the model, faces, right mouse button and faces, and then we can use the selection marking menu, control right mouse button, and then we can do grow selection and just grow. And then we can use a key we haven't talked about before, which is the G key. The G key is for repeat last action. So if we just hit the G key, it's just going to repeat what we just did. We can hold and control the right mouse button and shrink the selection, and then we can just shrink the selection, and then we hit G key again to reduce the selection. We can also use shift and greater than and less than to actually grow and shrink the selection, but that only works if you have a proper international keyboard. Like if I used to use a Norwegian keyboard and you don't actually have these very easily available. So I prefer to just use control, grow selection and grow, and control, grow, shrink selection and shrink selection. Just use the G key to repeat the last action. We can also isolate our object by hitting control 1. Now you can see this item up here has been enabled, this UI item. So control 1 will toggle on isolation, and now we can only see this single object. Now you can click around and you can do all sorts of things to it. And if we hit control 1 again, it's back to normal. We can also hide it by selecting the object and just hitting the H key and then we can Shift H to bring it back. I prefer to isolate it because that's less destructive, because that's an actual mode we go into, and it doesn't actually change anything. It doesn't change the renderability or anything of it. Now let's look into the modeling tools. The first tool we'll look into is how to smooth the model, how to go into subdivision surface mode. We do this by hitting the 1, 2, and 3 key. 1 is just regular polygons, 2 is subdivided with a cage, and 3 is just raw polygons. So now we can just easily go between 1 and 3, really useful. We can duplicate our model by hitting Ctrl D, and this duplicates the model like you can see, and then we can just move it around. We can delete the model by hitting the delete key. We can also duplicate a model by holding down the Shift key and just cloning it. You can see now just moving it around like this actually clones the model, which is really useful. We can change the behavior from duplication to instancing if you double click on the tool setting, and we'll go all the way down to the bottom, and now we can change this from clone to instance. We can just select both of these, select one, select the other, and hit the delete key just to get rid of them again. We can also extrude by holding down right mouse button, going to face mode. And then we can hold down the Shift key and just move it out like so. And now we can extrude in this way. We can also use the more traditional way of doing it, which is Shift right mouse button. And like we mentioned before, this gives us all the modeling tools, and then extrude faces. Shift right mouse button is going to give you really all the modeling tools you ever need. So extrude faces, and there we go. And now you can see we get this gizmo. Now we can just drag on the blue handle, and then we can just move this out like so. You can hit the G key to repeat it, and now you can see we get another extrusion. If we want to merge some polygons together, or merge some verts together rather, then we can go into vertex, select one vertex, select the other vertex, just by select one, shift clicking the other. Then Shift right mouse button, merge verts, and merge verts to center. This will just merge it to the center. We can also just hit the G key now when we've just done this, and this will just repeat the last action. What's also handy is that if you're fast for marking menus and you're confident in where they are, you can just do this, which means that you can just quickly just move up. So what I'm doing now is I'm selecting one, selecting the other, and then merge verts and merge verts to center. But instead of actually going up and then going up again, I'm just doing this one operation. So what I'm doing now, Shift right mouse button, and I'm just dragging up. So like this. And this just means it's incredibly fast to actually use the modeling tools. Same here as well. Now I'm just switching between vertex, edge, and polygon and object mode because I know where they are. Vertex, edge, polygon, and object mode. So this just becomes second nature. We can go into face, and we can do the same with extrude as well. Shift right mouse button and go down, but I can do this in one operation. Just go do like this, and then we can just do it. This is one of the reasons why Maya is actually a really fast modeler, because you can just easily get access to all these tools so quickly. So if you want to go from extruding, like this, extrude, to actually merging, you can just right mouse button, verts, like this, and then just merge them together. This just takes some time to get into your fingers, but once it's there, it's going to really speed up your modeling work. We can also use a tool called multi-cut, which I use a lot. Let's just go into object mode, right mouse button, object mode. Then we can Shift right mouse button and multi-cut, and we can now enable this, and we can just start cutting. So we can just start to cut where we want our cuts to be, and then we can right mouse button to commit to the cut. We can also use this tool to add loops as well. Control will, if you hold down Control while using it, will give us this really nice loop cut in the middle. So this is really the way I'm adding loops. I'm just control clicking with the multi-cut, and then I'm changing the loops by just clicking and dragging like so. You can just click and drag just to drag on an edge, or you can just click where you want to go. And then right mouse button to commit. If you have a hole in the model, like so, we have a hole here, and we can create a hole by selecting a polygon, deleting, and we want to fill this hole, we can now go to edge, select the actual edge, right mouse button, and then we can go down to fill hole. Now in this case, you just fill it in with a quad, but what if we have a bigger hole, like so? We can right mouse button, go to the edge again, and then we can fill hole, and now you can see it just fills in the hole. And now we can use the multi-cut tool to just connect these guys up. So it's really nice and handy using fill hole and multicut together like this. If we have multiple objects like we have here, where we have the head now and we have the rest of the face, we can combine these two by shift clicking on them to select both of them. Shift right mouse button, and then we can go down and hit combine, and this combines it like so. Then we can, in order to separate it, we can, now you can see it's combined to one. In order to separate it, we can shift right mouse button, and then we can separate. And this now puts every single piece, unique piece, into its own model. And now you can go in here under the outliner, and now we can just see all the different ones. We can also subdivide the model as well, like with actual polygons. We can select the model, shift right mouse button, and then we can set this to smooth. Smoothing actually adds more polygons to it. This is not similar to hitting 3. This actually adds polygons to our model. So now you can see this increased the poly count by 4. And now you can just change the divisions here, which keeps just going crazy with it. So let's just undo this. If we want to bevel something, we can easily do that as well. If we can select an edge like so, we can just select one edge, shift, double click to select the other one. We can bevel by hitting Ctrl B, and this just makes us a nice little bevel. Now I'm using Control and middle mouse button to change the fraction. You can see here, this just changes the fraction. And then we can also change the segments as well, like so. We can also use this with shift right mouse button and bevel edges, like so. This is the exact same technique. Then we can slide the edges as well. So if we want to slide these edges down a little bit, we can shift right mouse button, and then we can use the slide edges tool. And then we can just slide them up like so. And then if we want to delete the edges, you could hit Control and backspace, and that actually deletes them perfectly fine. But that's a bit lengthy for your arm to travel. You actually have to move your right hand off the tablet or the mouse. So what I prefer to do is I prefer to use shift right mouse button and delete edge, and this will delete the edge. So this just looks like this when I'm just working like so. Shift right mouse button, just deleting down. Next up, we just have to talk about a concept well called history. This is similar to what we talked about in terms of nodes. But what you can see now is if we Control A to go into the channel box, you can see we have a lot of inputs now. This just means that we have added a lot of nodes to our actual model. And this is awesome because we can now change them, but it's also terrible because we don't want to change them. This is just direct modeling. We're not doing any kind of procedural modeling here, so we really don't want to change this ever again. So what we can do, we can delete our history. And this is also why Maya gets very crashy sometimes, because you haven't deleted history for like 2 days. This should become very long. So we can do this if we go to Edit, Delete by Type, and then we can delete history. You can also see the hotkey here is Alt, Shift, and D. That's what I prefer to do. So Alt, Shift, D. This is just in my fingers, so I just do this a lot. And this just deletes the history. Let's just delete this, and let's look into how we can move the pivot. So I want to create a cube now. Shift right mouse button and cube. And then I just want to move this up just a little bit like so. So now you can see that we have the pivot right here. But we can also move it. If we hold down the D key, we can now move the pivot. And we can also snap it if we were to now just click on where we want it to go. So you can snap it to a point, you can snap it to a polygon, you can snap it to an edge. So this is really useful because now we can snap it to this edge here. And now we can rotate it using the E key. And now we can just see, you can see we can start rotating like so. What I use this for quite often is if I'm in a situation like this and I want to move, for instance, this edge up like so. I want to move this in this exact direction as this edge here is. I could of course just do it like this, but that's very inaccurate. So what I can do, I can hold down the D key and I can just click on this edge. And you can see I can just move this perfectly up and down like so. So this gives you a lot of control. So moving the pivot around is really easy and really powerful. So hold on the D key and just click where you want to go. And if you now want to reset it, you can go to Modify, Center Pivot, and this just recenters the pivot. Let's look into some deformers as well. Hide the cube, or actually let's just delete the cube, and then we can use the deformers. So we'll look into the bend deformer first. We go way more in depth in this in the full series, but let's just take a quick peek into deformers. We can access deformers if we go all the way on top here, and then you can see we have deform. And we can access the bend deformer if we go to non-linear and then bend. And then you see we have the curvature has been exposed now under the bend deformer, under input. And then we can just start to set this to an amount. I'm just using the middle mouse button to actually change this value. You could of course go in and just start to type in numbers as well. But I just prefer to just select the curvature amount and then just middle mouse button dragging, like so. If you want more control, you can also hold a control and middle mouse button. Now it's a lot slower and you have a lot more control. So now we can use this to create some, like a nice little arc. So instead of modeling this perfectly flat, we can now just have a bend modifier and just bend this down. We can also create it, set it to 180 degrees, which creates this like well or something like that. We can delete history on this if we want to make this not editable. So Shift-Alt-D, and now you can see this disappears, and now this has now been baked into it. So all the transformation or all the deformation has now been baked into it. Next, we'll look into the twist deformer. We can access this by going under Deform, Non-Linear, and Twist. And this does something very similar to the bend, just that it twists it. So what this does is this will just twist the model. So now we can create this really nice twisted feel like so. Let's just select both of these and move them up so you can see what's going on. And then we can just twist it and you can just see what happens now. So a twist deformer is super useful. And then we'll look into one of my favorite deformers, which is the lattice. Now we'll go back to our trusted little orc character. And if we now go to Deform, Lattice, we can now see that we get this, this shape around it. And if we now right mouse button while this is selected, we can go to Lattice Point. Select one of the points, like so. Now we can just start to move it around. And now you can see that this just creates a really nice, deformation. And we can now see that this point is way off. So what we can do, we can just go to the Move tool and just hit Reset tool. And then we can just select it again like so. So now we can just use the lattice to really just change the design of this quite quickly. So this is just a really handy way of just changing up your model. It doesn't have to be a character like this where you can change the character design. It can also be a car which you just have to bash up or something like that. So the lattice, super useful. We can just delete the lattice now, and I can see it's going to pop right back to where it was. This is really an advantage of Maya, that Maya is very non-destructive when it wants to be non-destructive. If you're dealing with deformers, it's really a pleasure to work with like this. Then we'll look into some quick animation. If we have a quick sphere, which this is going to be some pretty quick animation, trust me on that. We can change the workspace from Maya Classic to animation. Now you can see the entire workspace actually changes and we're in a camera view. We can just hit the F key now to change this to be centered. And now you can see we can change the frames. We can also change them down here as well. We can see these are the currently visible frames. So we can now change this as well, just dragging this left to right. And now we're at the maximum of frames. So frame 1 to 200. We can also change the amount of total frames by going here and set this to 250. Now you can see we get more frames. So this is 150 and now we get less frames. And we just scrub here to change the actual, what actual frame we're at. If you want to actually set a key, this is very easy to do. You can set a key by going to the frame you want to. Let's say in this case, it's frame 1. Right mouse button on the channel you want to affect. In this case, we're just going to move this on the channel we want first just to see which one it actually is. Then this is the x-axis. Right click on it. Key selected, and now you can see this is now red. Move this to another frame which you want to go to, let's say frame 100. Now we move it like so. Then right mouse button again and key selected. And now you can see that we have keys. You can navigate in the graph editor by zooming in and out by the same way you navigate in the viewport. Alt right mouse button to go in and out, and Alt right mouse button to pan around like so as well. So now you can see we have two keys. And if we now were to just scrub between these two, you can now see that we get animation. You can also use the hotkey Alt and V to activate this. And now you can see that this is crazy fast. And this is because this actually just plays it not in real time, but as fast as it can. So now what should be around 4 seconds is played in like 1 second. So what we can do, we can go down here to the little running man who looks like he's being chased by a cog. Click on that. And then we can change this, the playback speed from play every frame to play 24 FPS. So hit save. Now if we hit Alt V now, you can see that this is much slower. So now it's actually going to try to play this in real time. So now this is incredibly important because otherwise you're not going to be able to see your animation. We can also change the tangents as well. Currently you can see that this goes from, this is a really soft tangent. We can select both of these and go to tangents, and we can set this to be a linear. Now it's just going to be a linear speed between the two. It's just going to go with a completely linear speed. We can change it back to auto. We can also just select them, hit D key, which will do the same thing. You can also play down here as well. And you can play backwards as well if you want to. If you want to delete a keyframe, you can easily do that as well. You can select the keyframe and then just hit delete. Or what we can do, we can delete it in the channel editor as well, the channel box. Right click on it and then just hit delete selected, and this deletes the selected keys on it. So, but my preferred way of doing it, particularly if I'm doing some animation, is selecting the keys and just deleting them like so. So let's look into rendering now. I'm just going to change this back to Maya Classic, and then we'll get back our little models, our little statue models, and then let's talk about rendering. Currently, you can see I have the wireframe selected, which is a bit crazy because we don't have to see wireframe on them. And we're also going to go into the camera view as well. We can do this by going to panels, perspective, and render camera. I already have a camera selected. I already have a camera created, which I can just go into. If you want to create a camera, this is very easy to do. You can go to create, camera, and camera. Or if you're in perspective view, hold on the spacebar, under Maya perspective view, you can navigate to where you want to go, and you can control Shift and C. And you can see this creates a camera from the location you're at. You can also just double click on it and you can call this camera render, whatever it might be. Let's just delete this. So let's go to panels, perspective, render cam, and I've already set this up. And now we can open up the Arnold render view. So Arnold render view under Arnold and Arnold, open Arnold render view. And this gives us the Arnold render view. So if we were to now hit the play button, this is now going to start to render. And this is a bit finicky sometimes where it doesn't actually go to the correct camera. So I just have to go in and just change this to the correct camera. In this case, it does actually do the correct camera, but sometimes you just have to force it in. And you can see that this just keeps rendering, and it's a really powerful way of working. We can also dock it as well. So you can set this top menu and just move this over to the right. And then we can just dock it in the middle, see this blue line, and there we go. And now it's just going to keep rendering. Down here, you can see that it just keeps on rendering. By default, though, it's going to be perfectly black, and that's because there aren't any lights, but we'll get to that in a second. Let's open up the Arnold render settings, and we can do this by clicking on this little clapper with a gear icon on it. And here you can see we have the actual Arnold render settings, or these are just the general settings, and we have Arnold settings here. But let's just go through them. First off, we have what is the actual file name going to be. This is when you batch render it out. What format it's going to render to. You generally will set this to EXR. What's the frame range? Well, currently there is none because the frame extension is set to frame, this extension, this single frame. We can set this to name.hash, and this gives us an actual frame range. So now we can set this to be 150. Now it's going to render from frame 1 to frame 150. What render camera should it render from? It's going to render from the one we set to be render camera. What's the resolution going to be? It's going to be a custom resolution, which I've just set to be 450. Or you can go in here and you can change this to a more standard resolution like HD 720. So these are all my default settings. Basically, what frames should it render? What's the format? What's the camera? And what's the resolution? Then next up, we have the actual Arnold render settings. These are specific to the Arnold engine. And this is really one of the reasons I like Arnold so much, because Arnold values human time way more than the computer time. So some things might take a bit longer to render in Arnold, but it's much easier to actually set up. The way you're controlling Arnold is essentially by controlling the noise levels. So here we have the overall noise levels, which is AA, just anti-aliasing. Then we have diffuse, which is the quality of the global illumination, the specular samples, the transmission, which is just another word for the refraction, the transparency rather, then we have subsurface, and then we have the volume indirect as well. So you can see this is just set to different numbers, but we have different numbers up here. And what do these mean? Arnold is very simple once you understand it. First off, we have camera AA, and this is a general multiplier for the other ones. So let's look into this. Let's do some quick math. So here you can see we have 3 samples, and this is 3 times 3. It's 3 squared. So 3 times 3 is 9. And we see we have 9 samples up here. And then we have 2 specular samples. That's 2 times 2, which is 4. And then we have 4 times 9, which is 36. And that's exactly what we're getting here. So that's why we have 36 samples. And this becomes important. Well, right now you can see we're not dealing with a lot of samples, but this becomes very important when you start changing these numbers. Because if we were to change this number from 3 to 5, which is a pretty seemingly insignificant number, now you're talking not 4 times 9, you're talking a much higher number. Now you're talking 5 times 5, which is 25. So now you're talking here 4 times 25 instead. So the numbers just keep going up a lot. So if we were to just practically change this now, if we change this from 3 to 5, you can see this goes from 36 to 100, which goes up a lot. So to 100, and if we were to change the diffuse to 5 as well, you can see it goes to 600. So it's really important not to go too crazy with this. The default numbers are generally quite good. The way I'm dealing with Arnold is I'm looking at the overall render, and then I'm seeing what part I have to pump up. If I have to only increase the samples for the global illumination, the diffuse, I'm just doing that. I'm leaving everything else. But these ones are generally quite good. And then if you are in a hurry, and I do this sometimes if I don't really care how much a single frame takes and I'm just going out for lunch, I'll just set this to something like 6 and everything just increases a lot. But this just means that we just generally know that it's probably going to be a quite noise-free image, even though it's going to take much longer to render. So essentially, it's these numbers multiplied by themselves, multiplied by this number up here. Now, there are a bunch more settings, but you can just look through the Arnold documentation to learn what these are. We're not going to cover this in this series because this tutorial would then be 6 hours long. What we are going to be covering, though, is Arnold material. This is called AI Standard Surface, and it's amazing. We can assign this by clicking on a model, right mouse button, assign material, new material, and then we can go to Arnold, and then we can click on AI Standard Surface. And this creates an AI Standard Surface for us. Now, if we were to go up to Arnold, open Arnold Render View, and we already have it here. If you don't have it, then it's going to pop up, and we can just hit play. Now you can see that this is going to be crazy overexposed, but we can change this. We can change this with the materials. We can also use a render region. If you hold on the shift key and just drag on top of her, now you can see it's only going to be affecting her, rather than the region. We can also just move this up a little bit so we're only affecting her. There's no reason to waste time by rendering something else. So now we can change the color. Basically what color she's going to be. We can just make her a lot darker. We can change the specular roughness from 0, which is a complete mirror, super sharp, to all the way up to 1, which means there's basically no reflections to speak of. Or you can set something in the middle, which means it's kind of reflective. We can change it to a metal by changing the metalness from 0 to 1. So now you can see this just reads as a metal right away. So if you want to make this something more like gold or copper, you can just change this to be something more gold or copper-like. So the metalness is really awesome because it's just an instant nice metal slider. Then we have transmission, which doesn't work if we have metalness enabled. So if you can see we enable this, we enable metalness, we can't have transmission, meaning you can't have a material which is metal and also glass. So we can set the transmission now to be 1, and now you can see this now becomes a glass material. We can change the color of it, so now we can make this something like a yellow material, yellow glass, red glass, whatever it might be. And we can disable this again. And now we can make this subsurface. Subsurface is super nice in Arnold. If we enable this, you can see this now becomes really subsurfacey. We can change the color of it. This is where you plug in your actual color map if you're dealing with skin. And we can change the radius as well to something a lot lower. So now if we set this to something like this, you can see we're going to have subsurface in certain areas. We can also change just the type to random walk v2, which generally gives us a lot more accurate subsurface. So this is what I'm doing a lot when I'm dealing with skin. When I'm doing skin shading in Arnold, which is probably the stuff I have most experience with Arnold, because that's the stuff I kind of do. Then I'm dealing exclusively with the AI standard surface and with random walk v2. You really don't need a specific skin shader or anything like that. You can also add a coat, which is more like a clear coat, which just gives you like another set of reflection on top, kind of like a car paint shader. So the AI standard surface is really probably the best shader I've ever used. It's really easy to use and it gives you fantastic results. Now let's look into the Hypershade real quick. The Hypershade is where we can really do a lot of the fancy shading. We can access it by clicking on the ball up here. And here you can see all the different materials we have. So if you want to find this material, probably the best way to do is just name it. You can do that up in the top of the node, call this test shader. So now it's easy to see. And then we can just scroll down here and you can see, there we go, test shader. And now we can middle mouse button, drag this into the Hypershade. And there we go. And now we can click input output. And now you can see that we have a test shader. So all the materials have to go into a surface shader as well. So you see we have the shader, which goes into an actual surface shader as well. This is where we can also input displacement. So if you're dealing with displacement, you would make a material and plug this under, or make a map and plug this under the displacement shader. So what we can do, we can input a file, like an actual texture map. So if we want to do this, we can go under base and color. We can click on the input here. And then we can click on file. And this is how you actually connect up a texture. So if you have your own textures made in Substance, Mari, whatever it might be, this is where you plug it in. So you can now just find the texture you want. Here is just a texture I have from the intro to Maya series. We're not really including in the scene files with this video, but you will get all these textures if you get the full course. So now we have a file texture assigned to the actual test shader. And here you can change the color space, and we can also change the UV tiling mode. So for instance, if you made this with UDIMs in Mari, you can just set this to UDIMs. We can also plug this into different slots as well. If you want this to go under the specular roughness slot, we can easily do that as well. Now we can take the out color and we can just drag it under the roughness. But if we try to do that, let's see what happens. It's going to not allow us to actually do this. And that is because now we're trying to drag out RG and B, all the different colors, into a slot which only accepts one color. So we can click on the little plus sign, then we can do out color and set this to specular roughness. And now we can connect this up. So this is how you can have one image map and it could be connected to multiple outputs. If you want to grade these, you can do this with an AI range, which is an awesome node, which you can use to really grade roughness nodes. You can just take the full out color onto the input, and then we can set the out color. Again, same thing. We can set out color R to specular roughness, and then you can start to grade it. Like, we're not going to go too crazy in this tutorial with the specific nodes, but just know that the AI range is fantastic when it comes to grading, particularly roughness images, because now you can really control the input and the output. Another one which is really useful is the AI color correct. So AI just means it's a color. It's an Arnold node. It doesn't mean artificial intelligence. It just constitutes that it's an actual Arnold image. And then we can just type AI color correct and not color convert. Make sure it's color correct. And then we can use this as well. It's annoying because you can't really just put it in the middle like you can in something like Nuke. You have to actually connect it. So input, and then we can set the output. So this is how I'll often do it. Now this just means that I can now just grade these images right away. So now we can just start to do some hue and gamma shifts, saturation, contrast, and all that. If you want to create nodes as well, it's very easy to do. This is what we've been doing. You hit the tab key. Now you just type what you want. So if you want a file node, you hit tab and you hit file and texture. And this is how you create a file node. This is what Maya did automatically for us when we went under the shader and we just typed click here and create a file node. This is exactly the same as what we just did. And if you want to drag a new shader in, you just middle mouse button, drag the shader in, like so. And then the very last thing we're going to look into is lights. This is hide the area light we have. So we already have an HDRI. So we are just going to be hiding the lights we have. So select 2 lights and just hide them. And this just means the image turns black. The first one we are going to looking into is going to be the HDRI light, which is under lights and sky dome light. And this is, it's not technically an HDRI light, but it's one which gives you overall illumination from everywhere. So this is a really powerful light because you can just plug in HDRIs and you get very natural lighting right away. So if we go to the shape of it, this is what we talked about nodes early on, because now we have the transform and we have the shape. So we know we can't do anything with the transform, and it has to be in the shape. So here we can change the color of it. You can change this to red. You can change the intensity of it and all that. But what we'll do now is that we will input an image under color. So under color, make a file node. And this is where I've downloaded an HDRI before. I download all my HDRIs from hdrihaven.com, and no affiliation with them. They're just really awesome. So check them out, HDRI Haven. So I downloaded a bunch of them. So let's look into this one. So now you can see we have this really nice natural lighting. You can also go into the perspective view. Hold down the spacebar and then perspective view. And now you can see the light here. So you can just start to rotate this around, and now you can see the lighting changes dramatically based on the angle. You can also just go and move it like this if you want something crazy. You can also just hit pause and play right here. And then the next one we're going to be looking into is going to be the area light. If you go to Arnold, lights and area light, now you can see we get the nice little area light right here. We can just move this into place, move it up like so. We can rotate it. Again, remember, W is for move, E is for rotate, and R is for scale. So we can just move and scale and rotate this into place like so. So now we can move it up like so. And you're not really going to see a whole lot happening. That's because the intensity is set to 1 and there's no exposure. I prefer to enable a lot of exposure. Let's set this to 15 and see what happens. And this makes it crazy bright. And that's because this is exponential, meaning that a level of value of 14 is going to be significantly darker than a level of 15 and 13 and so on. So you can see it becomes significantly darker. So now we have a level of 8, which is pretty good. Maybe we want to set this to 9 or 10. And it basically becomes twice as bright for every single number. We can also add some color into it as well. So we can just make this have a little bit of a yellow tint or orange tint to it. And then we can just hold down Control key while being over this, and we can just have fine control over the exposure. So again, Control and just drag here to really have fine control over it. We also have to talk about the setting here, which is called the samples. This is basically the same as what we had before when it comes to the samples here. The amount of samples will be multiplied by the camera AA samples. So if we have 1 sample, it's going to be 9 samples, which is nothing. So generally you have to enable something, set this to something like 3, particularly for an area light, which has very soft shadows. So it's really important that you have nice and soft shadows with really high samples. So again, that's the difference between 1 and 3. It basically goes from no samples at all to pretty acceptable levels of samples. So we can duplicate this light around. I just pause the render whenever I'm doing this, because there is no reason to have this running. We can just move it up like so. See if we can just get some nice rim lighting on them. We're starting to get some rim on her. And now we can just set this to something a lot higher again. Something like 10. And now you can see it, we get this nice rim lighting on her. So now our render is completed. It's just gonna keep on going until it's done. You can see here this took 35 seconds, and you can see the resolution, what camera it rendered from, what the samples are, and how much memory it took. Now we can go to File, and we can save image. And now we can just save this. It's just gonna go under the images folder. And now we can type render 01, and it's important to actually enable the extension as well. Generally, a PNG is perfectly fine, but if you want to do some more grading on it, I prefer to do an EXR. If you're going to keep working on this in a professional pipeline and you're using something like Nuke, I really prefer EXR. But if you're just dealing with Photoshop, PNG is totally fine as well. And now you can see our render is just been rendered out and set to a PNG, which you can now open up in Photoshop or wherever. If you want to render this out properly as an image sequence though, you're gonna have to change this from modeling to rendering. See, we have all these different workspaces, and then go to render, and then batch render. Now, if you batch render, then it's going to respect the settings we set here. This is where it's going to be respecting the camera, the resolution, the actual name, the naming convention, and so on. So Maya is an incredibly deep and rich software, and there is just no way we can actually cover everything in an hour. The goal of this video was really to give you a good overview, and it was a video which I wanted to see when I started out. Really, where are the buttons? What are the main concepts of the software? Now can I just get my hands dirty? If you're interested in really learning more about Maya, I highly recommend this series. This took ages to make, and we really poured our souls into it. It's over 12 hours long, and it really does cover a lot of the things you need in order to get started. A lot of the things we covered in this tutorial are also covered way more in depth in the full series. If you want to, you can check out the chapter list. You can see there are like 73 videos, so it's really extensive. And it covers really most of the things you need, like XGen and how all the specific lights are, way more animation, way more shading, way more modeling, way more retopo, all of the different things. So check it out, link in the description, and I hope to see you in the next video. And if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Let me know what you thought of this video and how we can do better in the future.